to see, we all want to be real, and we're searching when we're finding.
Hi, Dan Winter here.
Hello, Dan.
Well, hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm just great, thank you.
Wonderful to have you on.
Happy to be here.
Yes, we have prepared a little bit that we want to talk with you today, and of course we welcome you warmly here in our OpThink show. But for the beginning, I would like just a quick introduction to the listeners that don't know about your work. You have many shows out there where you explain what you do. You've done a whole bunch of stuff, from electrical engineering, psychophysiology, mythology, crystallography, psychophysiology, all over the fields. System analyst for IBM, spiritual psychology, X-ray astronomy analyst at MIT, and so many other things. And of course, your recent and current works are all over the internet. You have your website that you can mention in a second, and there's just a boatload of information to get familiar with the work you do, and as well as, of course, many YouTube presentations and interviews that you've given. We invite you to ask some specific questions just to satisfy our curiosity, and we hope that will shine a light on things from maybe a few different angles. But what is really great in your work, and what we appreciate very much, is that of course you're somewhere a physicist, but also you're spiritual, and that is, at least in the open field, somewhat of a rarity, where you actually explain things to a molecular level and still can talk about Egyptian gods, and not get sent out of the room. But yeah, that just for a quick introduction. Maybe you want to mention your books and where to find them, and your websites.
Well, thank you. Yes, well, the main website for Dan Winter Implosion Group is fractalfield.com, and at the top there, people will see my new book, Origin of Biologic Negentropy, which is restored centripetal force. It's called Implosion Group Research. And we have bioactivefield.com, which is all of the bioactive field projects, including theimploder.com, which is implosion for agriculture. And then the major new project is theraphi.net, T-H-E-R-A-P-H-I, therapy by phi, theraphi.net, where we have plasma rejuvenation. We're having dramatic effects. It's based on the original Priori device, which is was very effective against cancer and many diseases, and true time-reverse rejuvenation in plasma, which is in part also kind of a shamanic stargate and wormhole and time reversal. Very interesting physics.
Now we get into that a little bit later, on the actual practical applications of all that knowledge that is being brought forward. But for now, yeah, your current works in this year are really interesting to follow, because we have so much all over the place that is happening in all these fields. We just recently, and that would be the first question for you, heard about LIGO, Virgo, gravitational waves, and with that, now Einstein is right, and everything seems to be relativity again, and it's just very coincidental. What is your take on all this, and where, if observation is right, where faults perhaps made in what actually happened and how they presented it?
Well, we have a very specific theory of gravity. It's called phase conjugate origin of gravity. Detailed physics article, fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity, and a very specific new equation, Planck length and time times integer exponent golden ratio, called phase conjugation, which is the geometry of implosion, actually. And in that geometry, golden spiral path, which I showed is the radii of hydrogen, you have the only path at which charge compression can become charge acceleration towards center, named the gravity, where the phase velocity heterodynes recursively constructively interfere and produces acceleration of charge towards center, origin of centripetal and negentropic forces, including gravity. Now, that theory of gravity, which is very detailed there, with very compelling new equations, new proven equations for radii of hydrogen, new proven equations for the ratio of the mass of the proton and the mass of the electron, predicts something very specific about gravity, that the phase velocity heterodynes go at golden ratio multiples times the speed of light, and that phase conjugation is the cause of gravity, meaning that then the speeds faster than light that are measured will be golden ratio multiple times the speed of light, which Professor Raymond Chow has shown. So the importance experiment is not even done. That is, if you arrange the masses of the universe into golden ratio oscillation, which is dodecaecosa symmetry, that increases the amount of gravity. Now, interestingly, it's been proven, Nature magazine is New Scientist, that the geometry of the masses of the universe are in fact a dodecahedron, meaning there will be extra gravity. And that's the extra gravity which is the only excuse for this dumb idea called dark matter. So all they have to do is arrange masses to be in phase conjugate spacing dodeca and see that there will be microgravity increases, and that'll prove that this gravity wave phenomena is actually capacitive charge acceleration by golden ratio multiples times the speed of light. So that's all explained there. Fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. It's a very coherent theory of gravity and answers something Einstein really didn't have a clue, which is, why does an object fall to the ground?
Yeah, that's what just makes it kind of, the question might go up. It's the 100th birthday of Einstein, and
He
it's
got a
just.
lot of things right, but he got a lot of things wrong too, like thinking that the speed of light is a speed limit. And this talk about space-time, in fact, what is the universal medium is the compressibility of charge. That is the ether. And when charge rotates, it stores inertia that's called mass, and it creates a period that's called time. So charge rotation is the fundamental, not space-time.
So what does it mean? Do you agree with what they found, or do you think it's a little bulged up and they need a little bit more funding?
Well, no. I mean, it's true. They measured the fact that when black holes converge, it sends out a pulse, which you can measure as a slight change in microgravity. And they believe that it traveled at the speed of light. But yet when Hodowanek and Ramsey measured gravity, they used something called the Rustrack recorder, which is capacitive coupling. And they were able to use a 25-cent device, which is basically a capacitor, replacing the multi-million-dollar transducers that Weber and others used to measure gravity, meaning that your liquid crystal, your brain, can couple a gravity wave just as well as these expensive transducers, and that basically capacitive coupling for phase conjugate longitudinal EMF is the mechanism of gravity. And that was all proven years ago. Google Hodowanek gravity wave detector and you'll get all the information, or goldenmean.info/gravity code.
No.
I mean, if you want to ask me about physics questions, fine. I mean, I don't mean to leave the non-technical reader in the dust here, but the fact is that if you arrange mass into a fractal, which is called phase conjugate, it creates a centripetal force towards center. I'm not the first guy to say that fractality causes gravity, but I'm the first guy to write the equation to prove it.
Yeah, very interesting. And also, Dan, maybe you could share your insights about the current energies of this century and where humanity is heading, and maybe some planet changes we are seeing now, global warming, and also cultural awakening we are all witnessing. So what in terms of energy is happening right now?
Well, we like to create a universal language to think about spiritual evolution using physics, which is that the human body creates a coherent cold plasma field, sometimes called the aura or the Ka, your boat to the underworld. And if you make a coherent aura, which is very measurable, then you can take something with you through death, called plasma projection, very measurable. And so basically the task is to focus enough plasma in your aura to make it transportable. And that physics is well described. It's basically centripetal forces. It's what spiritual people call the quality of grace, orgone baraka, or as Celestine Prophecy put it, all human interaction is about charge. So as people understand their spirituality is in fact physics, the The joke is we can now find out if the Pope is a Catholic because the Chi refers to the coherence of your boat into the underworld, your aura, and that's measurable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that enables us to teach our young people what is important about life, which is the ability to attract a significant aura, which is basically follow your bliss. And the physics of how to have a bliss or transcendence experience is the definition of culture. There is no doubt if you're able to teach your young people how to have a bliss experience, you then have culture. There is no other definition because, in fact, it's the only way you get an immune system and take memory through death. And by that definition, no Western country has culture, but every indigenous people had culture.
And of course, it is measurable now because we've learned how to measure it. But we knew people through all ages that were able to see the auras and were able to give it or see in what state of energy an aura would be. Maybe not with the mathematical equations. That is something that seems to be I don't know, that this is our time. We're writing stuff down, and I'm not so sure if that was always the case. But
What's so cool is the Therify.net, our plasma device, triggers clairvoyance. It makes auras visible the same way Kirlian does. And all it is plasma implosion, which is to say, add charge radiance the same way high voltage bias enables Kirlian to make the aura visible. So clairvoyance is a very understandable physics in the same way that Korotkov used infrared and UV photography to measure where the plasma aura goes after death.
Yeah, beautiful. And it's also very interesting how uniting science and art together, we are able to see ourselves deeper into all fractal nature. Even the word physics is like, phonetically sounds like phi and C and X. So again, seeing that chromosome of ours inside of ours and steering
Actually,
that fractal.
yes, phi cycle, yes, cycles of phi. But it's true that really graduating from the human condition is a matter of learning the physics of plasma projection, whether you call it Stargate Dharana, as they did in Sumerian times, or whether you call it astral projection or remote viewing, or taking memory through death. The physics is simple. It's the ability to project a plasma bubble, which is what you do when you lucid dream, which is why that's such an excellent predictor whether you'll take memory through death. So many of these technologies have to do with cold plasma, like monoatomics and Keshe and Therify, because phase conjugate fractal atomic geometries, monoatomics, create a closed centripetal field that holds a charged bubble together called cold plasma. How your aura is assembled.
And what's the emitter of that aura?
Well, basically, you start, you've got a bunch of molecules, but they eventually attract a bigger and bigger charge radiance field, your aura or your Ka. And it's at a cellular metabolism level. It starts with a long wave, food comes in, and then at the climax of cell metabolism, the cell makes high quality, coherent ultraviolet light, which is the biophysics of meiosis and mitosis. And that ultraviolet coherence becomes projectable, the blue fire you see during good sex, for example. And it goes up the spine, liquid pump, sacrocranial, physics of kundalini, etc. And eventually it becomes a cocoon that's projectable. And learning to be the centripetal force holding that cocoon together is the electrical inertia of your attention, which is electrically measurable, as Bill Tiller proved. Focused human attention causes charge to compress. So the centripetal force of your attention needs to increase. It's measurable in the EEG. We have a new technology for measurement, flameinmind.com, where you optimize the brainwaves to phase conjugate implosion. Basically, it's how to create the low pressure point that steers tornadoes. And physics has no other subject than tornadoes, called vortex, string theory, or wormholes. So you can steer one tornado, you can do physics.
Yeah, and but is there? Of course, we're talking fractality here, so everything will emit something at some level. But we say the heart is that midpoint where kind of we can measure a little bit different from from elsewhere. What can you tell us about the heart and 7 layers here?
At the time, I taught the HeartMath Institute how to take their first EKG and how to do the power spectra, and then they got the definition of heart coherence wrong. I was then credited in the literature with inventing the word heart coherence because I invented the mathematics for measuring it, called a Cepstrum second-order power spectra. You can read about that at hrv-app.com, our new iPhone app for that, or the original fractalfield.com/coherence, the history of the discovery of heart coherence. It's actually quite beautiful that the reason measuring heart coherence measures pure intention is fascinating. You watch this internal phase coherence of the heart increase at the moment you send love. And the reason is because your heart knows which waves can be shared. And in physics, the term for which wave is maximally shareable is called coherence. And that climax wave function of coherence, the climax form of coherence, is called phase conjugate or fractal. And that equation has to do with Planck length and time times golden ratio. Next one is called phase conjugate, which is the 3D fractal in space and time, which causes all centripetal forces, notably the heart. The heart's electrical geometry for making that possible is the fact that the heart's muscle is layered in 7 axial tilt spin symmetries called the 7 spins of the tetrahedron from the Pettigrew and Lawrence Fields of Form, Vortex of Life, original anthroposophic text. We know that the heart muscle is basically occupying the tetracube of space, that the index by which, the sequence by which your heart muscle layers fire determines basically the flame letter that comes out of your heart that determines in which angle you're projecting donuts. So your heart is actually firing electrical donuts in 3D, and you have perfect 7 spin symmetry choice over what angle in which to fire off those donuts, which becomes the syntax for an alphabet. And in fact, it's the physics of the origin of alphabet itself, goldenmean.info/DNA ring, where if you take that golden spiral on the torus and you look at it from the shadows of the 7 spins of the tetra, you have the Hebrew and Sanskrit alphabet, which in brainwave parlance is how you throw the donuts of the charge fields, the charge domains of your mind, which is the physics of telepathy, etc., that you're actually doing plasma projection. It's like a spacecraft learning how to navigate because it knows how to control its thrusters. And after you die, that's the only way you're going to steer.
Yeah. It's also very interesting, like, in 21st century, we're having more and more, heart illnesses, especially heart attacks, people are experiencing. So why this became such a common illness in human society, and maybe there are some energy imbalances here?
The very good question. The physics of the electrical origin of the heartbeat is the answer to your question. That fractality, which is the implosive charge, is the reason the heart is able to beat. It basically implodes its capacitance from its environment. So the actual wattage, measurable electrical energy, it costs your heart to fire, is determined by its electrical environment. So if you're in a metal building with electrosmog and dead air, the wattage it requires to fire your heart is a tremendous waste. Whereas if you're in what's called fractal air, sacred space, circle of old trees, which is very measurable, Korotkov measured the electrical quality of the air, which enabled phone calls to ancestors, called fractality in air. Pictures at goldenmean.info/architecture. So a fractal electrical environment, otherwise known as the electricity of sacred space, enables the heart to beat efficiently. It's at the beginning to understand the origin of the heartbeat. The original book in that mathematics was called When Time Breaks Down, The Origin of Cardiac Arrhythmia, Arthur T. Winfrey. And you see the fractality of the electric donuts imploding, which is how the heart actually fires. So basically when your child says, "Come on, baby, light my fire," what they're actually saying is find a fractal space, or they're saying get fractal or get dead.
Yeah. Another subject also interesting about the heart is the body anatomy. And, we have the heart on the left side of our body, not on the right side, and not only, those 2 hearts, like we all have, 2 legs, 2 arms, but we have heart on the left side of the body. So how that also correlates with the energy flow and the work of the heart?
Well, the body's asymmetry is fascinating. The right-left brain is differentiated, intuitive versus logical, by actually a net difference of centripetal versus centrifugal electric vorticity. So similar for the asymmetry of the heart, that the heart requires presence on the more centripetal side of the body electrically to enable implosion, because enabled implosion is the origin of all life.
Hmm.
An antiomorphism, which is this asymmetry, is a fascinating subject. Why all biological proteins go one way, for example, up the down staircase. It's why the one polarity of magnetism increases pain but decreases healing rate, and vice versa. So one polarity, the north-south magnet or plus minus, is actually a net difference of centripetal centrifugal, which is the only definition of plus minus charge as well.
Yeah, beautiful. And also the heart, the heart symbol is Leo ruling the heart in astrology, and also Leo is ruled by sun, and the sun symbol is looking like the donuts you are sharing, in your presentations, in your graphics. And again, donut looks like also the sun symbol, which is the circle with the dot in the middle, again the fractal. So yeah.
That's nice. There's a book about that. It's called Secret Places of the Lion. The other thing is that if you see the actual symbol for the Valentine, it's actually the symbol for phase conjugating waves.
And there is something, or has been said about how our heart energy, how our heart rhythm, of course, kind of is dictated by what emotion we have, or vice versa. And that is because we are in this fractal universe and in this fractality, and we're able to fractally travel is measurable most likely somewhere else in the universe. Our combined and our single heartbeat. Is that right?
Well, the wave shape of the emotions are well documented in the music literature. Centix, the article is goldenmean.info/touch, and basically it's a simple set of ratios that determine a heterodyne series. The anger and hate emotions are destructive, whereas the constructive interference of the golden ratio in musical notation creates literally the touch that expresses love. So the discipline to control the heart muscle, which is basically eventually how you will project your aura at death, the shape of the pericardium, which is a cavity around the heart, is called the hat of Osiris, because that is the shape. It's called the Phrygian cap as well. And the muscle that determines you have the ability to shape the heart cavity, which determines the heart resonance and therefore plasma projection, is identical with your muscles around your eye. To have control enough of the muscles around your eye to modulate the shape determines if you can focus your eye. Well, the same is true of the heart muscles and the pericardium, and the power spectrum of the EKG is how you reveal that. That's why it's so clear that when you have coherent emotion, you have heart coherence, because you've actually learned how to steer the heart's electrical fire, and that actually translates into ability to steer your aura even when you dream and when you die.
Very interesting. And also, how can you maybe share some experiences or just your intakes about the sun gazing, and how sun as being a portal works with the times we're gazing into sun, and how beneficial that is to our bodies?
It should be done carefully and gradually, but it is incredibly powerful. Well, actually, the heart of the sun is the same 7-5 spin slip knot as the geometry of the human heart muscle, and also the geometry of the heart of hydrogen, called the Anu. Perfect slip knot, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. And the heart of the sun experienced shamanically is a cool eyeball organ of perception, and it is the only way in and out of here, actually, because it has the only inertial escape velocity. So any shaman that's actually graduated has actually seen through the eye of the sun. And the ultimate inertial phase lock is there, which is what we call a collective unconscious, etc. Ancestors called it sun god, so very appropriate, very appropriate.
Yeah, the Eye of Horus again in Egyptian mythology.
Yeah, Horus being basically Enki in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, Osiris, and the reason he called it Atun was basically because what he meant by sun god was the fact that all useful plasma for the human condition arrives through the heart of the sun. The kind of joke about that is if your ETs arrived in heavy metal, you know they're from the wrong side of the tracks. But if they arrive in a plasma body that came through the heart of the sun, you know that you can talk to them. Well, the way that was measured is that when more than 1 million children sing the same song 11 different times, it was measured, created dramatic making peaceful of the solar flares. So in fact, the sun requires a centripetal force that we make, and that's an introduction to our destiny if we grow up.
Let's go to DNA. DNA is anagram of and also of Dan. So DNA and Dan, there's something to be said. We see right here that it's a binding material, and of course, when we look at not solely the scientific aspect but bind the spiritual aspects in, then it's binding kind of body and soul together, and it's showing us, or maybe you can elaborate on our DNA here a little bit.
Well, the central bond of the DNA ladder rung is hydrogen. I wrote the equation that proved the radioactive hydrogen phase conjugate in Fractal. So the zipper down the center of the ladder rung of DNA, called the soul, basically participates first in the shortwave Planck dimension, hydrogen, but then the ratchet geometry of the DNA helix is a stair-step dodeca, which is a thread. And then if you braid the braid of the braid on the braid recursively, and you do that embedding properly, the way the geometry of the long wave is embedded in the short wave makes the DNA helix implosive to the point where the thread becomes string, becomes rope, becomes fat rope, becomes a torus. And that's when the DNA implodes. That's called getting a soul. What it actually means is you can make gravity bend the light, et cetera, and actually graduate. So functionally, DNA's recursive phase conjugate dodeca helix ratchet braid density is the universe's maximum number of superposed axes of spin symmetry, which is the only definition of going to the next dimension, the only one. So the ability to get the next dimension literally depends on whether you can braid your DNA recursively with phase coherence, which we have proved and measured is what EKG coherence and Bliss does. I suggested the study of Glenn Ryan. Glenn Ryan did the study. The braid density of DNA responds to coherent EKG, and we know why. Basically, your DNA is imploding. And so if you can withstand enough Bliss, like the lightning and Daniel Brinkley, then you can bend more light and eventually grow up.
So how can we practically look at that? If I have, or say, if someone has, negative thoughts all the time, depressed and all that, how can we actually see that the braiding of the DNA is different? Like, what does it do? Is it like just do random things, or there's a complete different plan, or how can you describe that?
Well, maybe we'll talk about it in positive terms, that the hygiene for making bliss possible, which is obviously charged dense food, the breathing, the yoga, the lifestyle, and the skill to choose a shareable thought, which is a charge attractor, the eureka moment when you can find pure principle in every moment. The physics is that biology only invented death to teach us to stop trying to store thoughts which were unshareable. Because, in fact, if you think pure principle, shareable thought, every time you do, you feel your hair stands up, you attract charge, you implode electrically. And if you do that continuously, then you don't die. So actually discovering how to store only shareable thoughts is an introduction of the physics of the hygiene for bliss. And we have, actually the book on that is Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality. The complete PDF is at goldenmean.info/consciouskids. You can download the PDF, but it's basically the hygiene suggestions that even from day one, you need to do the yoga, the gymnastic, because you can't withstand the inertia of the lightning force of bliss unless you develop the inner muscles. And then you need the diet and the lifestyle. And above all, you need to live in a place that has charge, which means you need to get out of dead metal buildings and dead metal air and electrosmog back to nature and charge density. Every one of the yogis in India, and there's hundreds who live to be, thousands of years old, they never once did it in a metal building. Where Padmasambhava and Trophimius, who melted the platinum called the Holy Grail, they both made enough plasma in their aura to melt the stone. And they didn't do it in a metal building either. They did it in a limestone cave.
Right. Yeah, this certainly we had discussed it in another show as well, how the building materials today, differ from back then, and how that is a kind of a picture of our a reflection of our mentality and bodies as well. If we're building with glass and stone, glass that shatters easily.
Well, actually, it's the dielectric constant. Actually, the glass and the stone is not the problem. It's the dielectric constant, which is why steel and aluminum is poisonous to every living thing, because its capacitance prevents the aura from breathing. The biologic architecture curriculum we designed is taught in many countries, goldenmean.info/architecture, and it's in many languages now. And it's a simple issue. The reason biologic materials are needed in a building is to make the aura. The high dielectric, which is what most biological materials are, means that it will be efficient capacitor. If the dielectric constant is high enough, when you ring that bell, it rings with more energy than you hit it with to ring the bell. Just why the Sufi who could make the perfect echo is the proven master, the perfect echo. And so this in the ancient times was called raising a shaman to the Lord, which became the word for altar in the church, shaman. It also became the word shaman and schematic and scheme and alchemy and chemistry. It meant access to the black hole. Well, actually, it was the ability to design implosive capacitance, which was the altar in the church, which now we know is a bioactive implosive charge field, Therify.net being the ideal example. Our ancestors came here with a terrible problem of aging prematurely, and so they had to design a rejuvenation field or they were toast.
Yeah. It's easy to imagine somebody to say, you got to be like the hum of the bell,
That's right. It's the perfect ring. And the perfect infinite resonance is how you enter collective unconscious and communion of saints. That the design of the burial ground has to be fractal. The Hopis knew, because charge distribution. And to be impressed into that is why your whole life has to flash by you in the second before death, because you got to do compression well to be distributed.
Back to the chromosomes for a second, specifically the X chromosome, which we, of course, if we're familiar with your presentations, we know that's a symbol that we see very often in if we are aware of the symbology in advertising and pop culture that we have these days, the X crossing over the XO, all that stuff is right there in front of us, and that goes right back to the X chromosome because that's right where these forces cross over, and it's just something happening or not so much happening in the middle. What's up there in the middle of the X chromosome?
Well, we put the graphics on that at goldenmean.info/magnetic X. And you'll see the graphics basically that if the axial alignment of the cross point of DNA reaches the perfected embedding called phase conjugate, then it becomes implosive, which is why basically the X chromosome identifies the female, because eggs are more fractal than seeds, and her mother's mother's egg was inside her mother's mother's mother. So that fractality of perfect embedding is what allows implosion to happen in DNA, calling it a magnetic X, basically.
Yeah, and what now the difference to the Y chromosome? And of course, that's a big theme. If you cut off the leg from the X, that has consequences in all kind of realms. So what's the differences here between the X and the Y?
It's interesting how they traced Eve, their first mother in Africa, from the fractality of the mitochondria, but then they tracked the male chromosome for bloodlines across ancestors like Genghis Khan, etc. So actually there's a poem about that in Sufi. It's called Cross Not Branch. When the original Draco Anunnaki guru got here, they said the men could give a seed, but the women should not receive. And what they meant, they did not want to shamanically bleed their bloodline. So the sperm could be distributed, but if the women received, then that would deplete the fractality of their bloodline, so cross not branch. That's a deep subject.
It certainly is, and it certainly is interesting if you look into these things. You find out that more and more in the past, it seems to be that there was, of course, we're dealing with matriarchy when we go further back, and all the little figurines that have been made from clay or whatever, and even paintings. The earliest ones depict mostly women.
Well, we know that the Draco Anunnaki were a matriarchy when Enlil and Enki left Pleiades with Anu. They were fleeing matrilineal, and the women were dominant, and that's the reason that every religion on Earth begins with fear of women, and we know why they were afraid of them. And that was originally how I studied the ET origins. The best source on that is probably Anton Parks. But we know that if you go back further, the Draco Anunnaki line were androgynous, and the book on that is Theuba, which is their ancestors. And having evolved to become sexual was increase the rate of evolution, but it was the onset of the Orion Wars, so it was a war between the sexes, quite literally.
All right, that's easy. That's easy said. Evolution. If I wanted to look deeper into the reasons why an androgynous, perfectly balanced being becomes all of a sudden, divides the sexuality into male and female. Why is that happening?
Well, no, going from androgyny to sexual reproduction definitely increases the rate of evolution. It's well known biologically, diversity, et cetera, but also then it increased the stress, and that was the beginning of the Orion Wars. The women actually originally were naturally stronger and more psychokinetic and more telepathic, and so in the Orion Draco called Uru culture, the men and women had a different language. And that was then true of Aboriginal culture even today. And there was a reason for that. And the word for that, those different languages is articulated in Anton Parks. One's called Mesa and Eminir, from which we get our word emanate. And that difference of language had to do with the difference in psychokinesis. Yeah, it's a very beautiful subject.
It is philosophically very, very problematic. Who made the decision, the male or the female, to say, okay, we're gonna split up. That's kind of a biggie here. If we go back to Earth and look at cultures or mythological cultures, just take the Amazons. We're supposed to be those warrior women, tall and just held inferior male just for reproduction, kind of, in cages, if you will, literally or not. And probably if they had a baby that would be, visibly gonna be a tall guy, maybe they got rid of that or so. So there are. It's an interesting question. Who made the move or which intent was there to split that up?
Well, there was a natural telepathy that was female originally, and the original dragon queens, they were called Asa Uru, from which we get our word Asuras and Asuras and dinosaur. Asa means queen of, Uru means Draco bloodline, and so the origin of the fear of women on this planet is the right question, and the origin of the fear of women on this planet, which is the origin of every religion on this planet, is off planet. And basically it was a biological thing that the male culture was subservient, and so when they arrived here they tried to I mean, the swings between matriarchy and patriarchy are a classic Caduceus, and the still point at the end is the climax.
Yeah, I mean it's visible in the genealogy. The Y chromosome doesn't really look like a perfect Y. In the angles, it really looks like a chopped off X.
And the fear of the fear of sex on this planet originated from the fact that in a cloning culture, which is what the Draco culture was, that no other method of reproduction was legal. And even though Enki's other name, Nudimmud, meant the cloner, in fact, he was experimenting with setting the DNA free, which was something which was illegal in his culture. But the physics was that they did not understand how to get a soul. That's the fundamental, which is manifested in their genetic disaster called Nephilim, which is loss of long-term memory and loss of ability to take memory through death, and basically loss of ability to be psychokinetic. So, which is basically failure to teach DNA to implode, which is failure to have bliss. So actually the vaccine to the Orion Wars is actually when you teach your children bliss, because that's what actually implodes their DNA and transcends those problems. So their original problem, they didn't even understand that sexual reproduction, the orgasm, is actually what gives you a soul, because it's the voltage of that moment of orgasm, which is why autism is so often associated with artificial insemination.
Yeah, it's really...
And Dolly the sheep died a terrible death.
Yeah, so it's just, you know, when you look backwards from where we are back, really take your time to go to the molecular level, and then go back again up, and you see how a Y chromosome, you know, a patriarchy, or makes a patriarchy, and how a patriarchy, you know, hails the Trinity, for example, you know, because there's the 3 points, which a matriarchy most likely wouldn't do.
But the symbolism is never as good as the physics. The physics is that having a soul is an electrically measurable phenomena, which is measurable in the power spectra, the high frequencies of the DNA, which is a political hot potato, metaphorically described as microchloridians in the blood in the Star Wars series. But Montauk was called boson 7. It was the power spectra of the DNA indicating the onset of implosion, which is ability to travel in time, et cetera, et cetera. So the physics of ensoulment is something that needs to be talked about scientifically, and then genetic engineers can know what DNA is for.
Yeah. Also, maybe we can just touch the subject about the black holes and the tunnel before seeing the light people are experiencing in the near-death experiences. And also you mentioned about the chromosome, you know, that X chromosome, and we have, you know, that crossing point. Again, it can also be relating to that black hole as well as an allegory.
Well, that's nice. We graphed with quite some detail the Heinrich Kluge form constants, which are documented to be what you will see when you die. The web article is goldenmean.info/immortality. You'll see the Kluge form constants there, which is a specific the physics map to successful death. And they are lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. The lattice, well, let's say lattice is rectilinear. The cobweb is an X, quite literally. And the reason you see lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral when you die is because that is the sequence of braid operations in your DNA enabling charge implosion, which is impressing you in the fractal conjugate field called the collective unconscious or communion of saints, enabling you to do charge distribution efficiency, which is how you join the collective unconscious and communion of saints. So, you know, the reason you have to see that compression event at the moment of death. And we know how to design an electrical environment to enable that, and it's the opposite of a modern hospital for successful death.
Yeah. It's also very interesting how that also correlates to the myth of the creation, Egyptian mythology. Again, waters of none, that black waters, and again we have that color of Saturn, which is black again, and Saturn correlates with time. It's timekeeper, so again the keeper of that box of time, of this, you know, matrix we are living here. So we have
black box.
Yeah.
Well, the Egyptians had a very specific knowledge of the projection sequence in the death realm, and it had to do with coherence and ability to not give in to fear and actually navigate. And that's why they use the Sothis rising, the alignment of the Syrian with the tubes in the pyramid to squirt gun the plasma through the heart of the star. And they knew, in fact, that the stars wouldn't come back if their king did not inhabit the star, the sun god. And they were right, actually, that if we don't properly inhabit the star, they don't make the centripetal force. necessary to become negentropic. So there's this, stars went to all that work to make DNA for a very specific physics reason. And the clue is, the stars' solar flares are affected by massive human emotion. People are beginning to understand how you can grow up and become a star. And the Egyptians knew it.
And they tell us, go watch in 4 days. There's going to be a big flare, and everybody watches, and that's the flare.
The actual flare is belying something underneath it, which is the alignment of a gravity wind, of an interstellar gravitational alignment, which, as Gurdjieff said, stars and planets experience gravity relations erotically. What he meant was that vast embedded fractal network creates a DNA radio, which even Paul Laviolette wrote Pulse of the Galaxy about the pulsars creating this interstellar telemetry.
Yeah, another interesting thing, when looking at the chromosome, I see again that crossing point, and it also reminds me about the equinox, and also that, that balance between day and night. Again, we have that balance between that DNA wave as well. And also what's interesting, that equinox is the Latin word for equal nights, and also nox is a generic term for the mononitrogen oxides, NO and NO2, and they are produced from the reaction among nitrogen, oxygen, and even hydrocarbons, so especially at high temperatures. So again, how that chemistry and the equinox and the astrology, astronomy are correlating in our inner fractal nature.
Oh, and there's another level of that, which is fun, which is that the ancestral Draco were nitrogen breathers, whereas the ones that used iron in their blood, which is called the Takadama Adam, the Adamic race, the red race, the iron blood, we were oxygen breathers. And the Orion Wars were called oxygen wars for that reason. So actually, the nitrogen metabolism versus the oxygen metabolism was the heart of the Orion Wars. And basically, the nitrogen breathers, which are the Draco, they breathe in nitrogen, they breathe out cyanogen. They had a lipid oil-based blood. And for them, oxygen and water are a poison. And for them, radioactivity is a Bliss inducer, which is called the Aradia couple in the modern couple in Russia. They're called the Aradia. When they changed to morphed to be able to actually inhabit radioactive environments because they were born too close to Chernobyl. Point being, they reverted to Draco blood chemistry. So you can actually tell who's winning on the planet, the Dracos or the humanoids, by when the oxygen going down and the radiation is going up. So the Orion Wars are still happening. It's otherwise known as total recall. It's about oxygen.
It's really interesting how we can see that in the words as well. How chemistry is used in our words. I mean, if you say no in our language, that's a clear negation of something here. If you're speaking human, and also the word fear that is induced. We split it up into two elements, Fe and Ar, which is kind of funky once you go into it, because the iron, ironically, is in our blood, and the argon is called the lazy element because it's not very happy to do things with other elements. So it's called the lazy one. And what happens when we're scared? Our blood rushes to the we're in shock. The blood rushes to the organs where it slows down, and you sit in the corner and you cower there, and you're lazy. So here is also a pretty clear connection from the word to over with the help of the element table down to what's actually happening.
It is ironic that iron that our psychophysiology lab at University of Detroit, I built a polygraph, was the first one in the world to electrically differentiate fear and anger, and that we use 8 psychophysiological variables, but in summary, it was vasoconstriction versus vasodilation, which is basically the blood getting centripetal or centrifugal. So if you implode your blood to the core, It's fight flight, and
Right.
that was actually demonstrated in catastrophe theory and emotions of dogs, that the chemistry was so different that they would snap from one to the other. So basically, the ability to vasodilate, which is also called the Order of the Red Hand in the mythic literature, is actually the ability to unpack and send the blood to the periphery. And you know your lover is ready to touch when she turns pink, because her blood's come to the surface to enable the magnetic iron to touch.
Yeah. Alchemy. Gold.
Well, and fear and anger were actually differentiated in that sense, centripetal, centrifugal, by simple difference between conduction and conductivity and resistance.
Exactly.
Where
That's what we're talking about. That is the pulling in or pushing out. That is the implosion or explosion right
yeah,
here.
and
Yeah.
and perfect conductivity is perfectly relaxation. Perfect relaxation is onset of Kundalini, because basically then you have the implosion up the spine and
Mm-hmm.
psychokinesis.
Yep. And you either shoot it out into the universe or you unk it. Anyways, the gold and the gold powder. I loved the story when I saw it in your presentation, what the gold powder, how it's made and what it does on the big picture and the molecular level. Could you just put that together for us?
Certain electrical environments, like the phase conjugate dielectric capacitance between the gold wings of the Ark of the Covenant, create implosive capacitance, which it invites non-destructive charge collapse, which enables the gold to become stable as a monoatom, otherwise known as monoormes or the spice. And that makes that gold soluble in water or blood. And if you eat it, your eyes turn blue and you live forever, which was called the mana, the spice, and became called Holy Communion, served in round white wafers. And it was a phase conjugate dielectric. It was implosive. And originally, it was addiction to gold powder, which caused the Dracos to come here and enslave the humans in the first place. And the same material was a dopant for atmosphere maintenance, and Sitchin at least got that part of the story. But in the long run, the AU and gold became the word for aura and value, et cetera, and money, geld, because it simply symbolized perfect phase conjugate recursive fractality. And the study of the monoatomics becomes the study of how plasmas become cold plasmas, which is how you get an aura in the first place, which is our work with Cache as well. And the interview we did on that is at fractalfield.com/cold plasma. And so the study of monoatomics, gold powder and monatomic carbon, fullerenes, et cetera, is all basically dodecaconstellations, perfect phase conjugate fractality, restored centripetal forces, and essential to understanding the evolution of matter itself.
Aura. That word says if you take that apart, you have the AU, which is gold as well, and
Have
the light.
Origin and Orion and Arian.
Yep. And Ra, the radiation, or Ra, the sun, god aspect of it, and yeah, it's funny how we all find this in this. But see, you said the symbolism is never as good as the actual uh,
Physics.
physics. The
Physics always
physics.
trumps the
I
symbolism.
didn't want to say science. Um,
Looking for a heart of gold and growing old. What that meant was that until you become perfectly fractal, you will age.
yeah.
Essentially, the ability to have an aura, AU, is the ability to be golden, which is the ability to be implosive. And when you accomplish that, you become charge distribution efficient, and eventually that enables you to inhabit stars, basically.
And how I mean, now we can measure this aura, but what have we recovered? Like some people that see auras, have we developed a system that if you measure this aura and then it shows a certain frequency, it shows a certain color, what that from that standpoint is it different from what the psychics tell us, or is it kind of just putting a big line under that?
Korotkov developed a clinically calibrated Kirlian GDV, gas discharge visualization, worked with him for many years. The technology has become cheaper, bio-well.eu. And, for example, recreational drugs put holes in the aura, and you can measure it. And then you have astral hygiene problems and parasites, etc. So, but now there's the aura system of Therify.net, which uses a plasma system to make the aura visible, which is also a high voltage bias like the Kirlian, and that means that you can do aura diagnosis much more systematically, which is what they're doing with the Therify installation here in South France with the Therify and the center in Perpignan. Now, Harry Oldfield developed an aura vision adapted video camera, and we tested it in Singapore, I think. And we had a very psychic, clairvoyant young girl there, Lael, and she said, "Oh yeah, the shape of the aura she saw was the same as in the device, but the color was different." We're realizing the color is pretty relative at those levels, but the plasma symmetry is basically indicating whether there's enough symmetry to be implosive. And anytime you have a hole in the aura, you're susceptible to parasites.
Might also, sorry to interrupt, but it might also be interesting to consider that if you see something like that with the eyes, that clearly use different mechanisms as the measuring object could well be a negative. Have you done some tests on negatives, like seeing negative colors of what's actually there?
It's more like plasma physics, the same way you see orbs. The orbs are using either fast shutter speeds, but basically its ability to see a weak charge field. It becomes diagnostic because you're seeing plasma projection. Interestingly, when the Russians teach people how to see without their eyes, you have to make your kundalini pump up your spine, and it lights up the screen inside your head. But we know how to light up the screen inside your head for clairvoyance. There's a brainwave frequency recipe. It's called phase conjugate. And it's the alpha-beta ratio. And if you can make alpha, then when you close your eyes, you see light inside your head. If you can't make alpha, when you close your eyes, you don't see light inside your head. And that's why you get addiction, because it turns the lights back on.
And is that light inside your head, or
what it is if you can make alpha, beta, and golden ratio, called phase conjugate origin of all perception, that creates a centripetal plasma inside the head, which is literally the plasma screen coming on, which is the movie theater to ancestral memory.
Have you seen it?
Well, that's what Kundalini is. It's a lightning bolt. I have 30 years of Kundalini experience.
Okay, we'll not go into that. But we may go into a little bit more numbers, maybe just the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9. How does that correlate here?
The article we put together about the plasma physics of 9 is at goldenmean.info/whale dreamers and goldenmean.info/hell's mouth. Short summary is that when Los Alamos found that 9 plasma donuts stacked is the moment of self-organization, then they saw it in ancient carvings, and they realized that it's the reason the pagoda has 9 roofs. And
which carvings are that?
The study at Los Alamos Plasma Physics was led by Tony Peratt, and then my shaman friend writes all the articles with him now. His name's John McGovern from Australia, Flinders Range. And basically, he discovered that he could read most every petroglyph on the planet by understanding a little bit of plasma physics, because the only thing the shaman is doing is projecting plasma cocoons. So then, the Dante's Inferno and the Egyptian Ennead and the Anunnaki 9 and the Puharix 9, it's all a name for plasma physics, which is the geometry of self-organization. And the 9 concentric golden ratio tetrahedrons, whose shadows called the Sri Yantra, became the movie The Last Mimsy, which is basically how to make a Stargate.
Yeah, it's also very interesting how Tesla also said the key to the universe.
Yeah.
That's also very interesting.
It's about interferometry.
Yeah.
Constructive wave interference. And that's why when the Anunnaki came here, their politics, which is called body polis, was what number they were in the 9. What they meant was whose plasma was most implosive and projective. So literally, politics body polis is the ability to have a plasma symmetry that's implosive, which is based on 9. Which is why you have Dante's Inferno with the 9 layers of death. Beautiful pictures there. goldenmean.info/whale dreamers. Basically, it's just that when you understand how interstellar bodies are built out of plasma, then you understand why every ancient culture, the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Anunnaki, all used 9.
Yeah, and that bliss moment we can achieve through different activities. It seems that we can achieve it through like sexual activities, like you said, where the body is rather under tension, or if you will, at tension, where the attention is focused at something. And in another way, maybe in a meditative surrounding where you rather passive and experience bliss through your soul, thoughts. What's the difference
Well,
here?
yes. And we do say that electrically access to bliss is the form of communication that comes after the internet. It's the first time when you become your own source of charge. So functionally, until you have access to bliss, you are electrically a parasite. But once you have bliss, that makes your implosive point of attention independent. And so it's really the only origin of freedom in any electrical sense, which is why the hygiene for bliss is so essential.
Yeah, and also access to bliss is to have access to heaven. And also the word heaven in phonetics is like have N, and also N in Egyptian mythology, or N or M or W, just represent that wave of energy. So again, to have that N instead of the matter, just to rise above.
Well, yeah, I think a deeper root there was Hey Ave. Hey is the Egyptian, Hebrew Hey Phi, which means the breath of charge, and Ave is to take flight, where charge takes flight, which is charge distribution efficiency, which is fractal or conjugate, similar to the planes of Sharon. Interestingly, when Lawrence Gardner analyzed the physics of the electric field around gold powder, which is phase conjugate, the popcorn can become fractal and infinite distribution of the electron field, called the planes of Sharon, which was the Hebrew name for heaven, which was actually achieving perfected charge distribution efficiency.
Yeah. Even the word heaven is also like he evens, he makes that balance. And
well, that's good too. The physics of letter forms are indicative of the physics of alphabets. That's right. So you have an interesting accent.
Yeah.
Christina's from Lithuania.
I see. Right. I understood the Lithuanians, they had a tradition where they wove a pattern of the tapestry in the belt or the sash, which was indicative of the genetic memory of the town or the lineage. So you literally did a village weaving, which was collective genetic memory.
I knew that from the Turkish rugs.
Right.
They put the lineage and the king in there. Of course, at some point, it's the king puts his lineage in there. But yeah.
And that's where the magic carpet came from, the Sufi. And my Sufi teacher, Saul Baradowski, he was a carpet merchant.
Yep. I read some. Wondrous bunch.
And the Sufi gymnastic really is a good introduction to the physics of bliss, really. Meetings with Remarkable Men, the famous film, at the end, you can feel the charge of bliss from the sacred gymnastic. And that's actually what triggered my Kundalini, the Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic, initially at age 21.
So is that some sort of power yoga?
Well, the Gurdjieff gymnastic, like forming twos, you do these certain sequence of disciplines where you're superposing more harmonics in your body's nested motions, which is basically charge acquisition. And when you do that as a group, you could think of Gurdjieff gymnastic as a sort of disciplined form of Sufi dance. But I was the piano player for the Gurdjieff gymnastics, actually. At Claymont.org, Charlestown, West Virginia. That was my Gurdjieff training. I was interested in the physics at the time. That's how I got into Gurdjieff. The Enneagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so much fun to take these words apart.
Mhm.
If you do gravity, you can do.
The G ray of Vita.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
Like the Jira Vitae. Oh, so much fun.
And in the Gurdjieff school, we read Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, which, you know, it was Beelzebub the devil, but then you realize Lucifer is basically Enki. And so it's Enki's tales, which actually is Hermetic. And Hermes' symbol, the caduceus, is now called phase conjugation. So we are the Hermetic school, fractalu.com.
Yeah, I mean the problem is really not giving it another name and presenting it in pictures. That all helps, but really what we kind of have to do it's this weird thing between being active and passive, between waiting and doing something, between being curious and having patience, you know, to just kind of. And I think that is that intent power that we have to put out while we're not doing, to have the intent, and while we're doing, carry that with us, kind of, so that we can then awaken together and just realize, you know, we don't even have to make websites. We don't even have to put it down on a piece of paper. We don't even have to use those fancy words, you know, to describe it, because we just get it all together now. But it's so much fun to work with the words, to go down to the molecular level and kind of put it together that way. It helps us remember, certainly, and you know, spurts our intuitive, creative process. If that's even if anybody's listening where that's half dead, that's going to help a little bit. So yeah, wonderful. That was my word.
So it does boil down, in the end, we must be able to teach our young people the science of how to attract charge, grace, chi, organ, baraka, which leads them to bliss experience. Once they start having bliss experience, as I did, then they have their own source of education. And so basically, right. It's a science. But that science is real. It means a change of diet, a change of environment, a change of movement, everything about attracting charge. That's why we wrote that book.
Right. It's just hard to, you know, use words that are, you know, if you ask a scientist or proponents of science, they're gonna not really want to agree with you on this, because it is split into the science and the spiritual path. You know, it is split into male and female, even though it comes from this androgynous whole being that is completely content at some point and then decides to do these actions.
But that's why we're working so diligently, sort of end of religion wars, once we see that everything we've been talking about as spirituality is best described with physics, and physics adds the romance of spirituality, but it eliminates personality worship and miracle worship. Instead, focus on the science of self-empowerment, which is actually, you know, acquiring grace and doing the homework to have a bliss process. So that the science can actually serve that reunification of schizophrenia, where people think there were four separate fundamental forces, or they think that matter and spirit are separate, and that is a schizophrenic disease.
Yeah. And another thing that we were wondering, that isn't quite clear, is in this fractal nature, where, you know, everything seems to be a fractal of a bigger thing or a smaller thing. How is it that there are some things that are not fractal, that not everything is fractal, and what is that, and what's the difference of quality here?
Well, I mean, if you want to be philosophical about it, the word live, L and the I5, turn into focus of recursion, whereas evil is the mirror opposite of live, which is failure to embed. So, actually, which is failure to achieve charge distribution. So, tetracubic structures isolate charge, octaves, for example, whereas dodec, pent, and golden ratio, low-fi structures create embedding fractality, phase conjugate recursion. It doesn't mean that you know, entering a tetracubic structure is evil. It just means that for a while, charge is isolated just long enough to achieve the need to become distributed again. And that's why the Sufis say, from length is longing born, because the experience of the agony of separateness leads to the appropriate yearning, charge the battery of yearning for oneness.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I was wondering you could probably shine some light on, and you've talked about it, how GMO and other influences will influence our molecular structure. And it's I mean, from just the sheer logic, for somebody like me, it's quite clear, you know, that you cut out just a part of the DNA, and you start building things with that it's not the complete picture that, you know, the original thing was made with. Just take an apple, you know, which in itself is a picture. So what can you say about that?
Well, it isn't that the concept of genetic modification is evil, no. But you do need to know what DNA is for before you hack up the DNA. And our scientists do not know what DNA is for. They're functionally clueless. DNA is to enable plasma projection, which is how you get immortal. And if you knew that, you wouldn't call it junk DNA, because the spacing codons is actually what allows the recursive braiding, the context dependency, which is what makes DNA implosive and therefore have a soul. So it is sort of shocking how fast the rats died when they fed them GMO soy. It was a beautiful story. So basically, implosive DNA and soul DNA, what that translates to mean is that every time you pick something to eat, you actually ask it, when was the last time you knew genetic diversity? Because genetic diversity is functionally equivalent to fractality, whereas monoculture makes DNA angry and mucus forming, because it's like putting a kid in jail for 100 generations.
Yeah.
So genetic diversity is the opposite of the Monsanto mistake. Genetic diversity is fractality, basically. Which is why, just a short story about that. So I was in Western New York, Crystal Hill Farm, and we had this heirloom seeds garden from the Seneca Indians, and there were 7 different colored tomatoes and potatoes and beans. And there was a stone circle labyrinth. It was pretty cool. And we had the vegetables from that garden, and my friends always were quite sure that this was better than eating LSD, because you had these visions from these vegetables from extreme genetic diversity. Just example of happy DNA.
Yeah, it's also very interesting. Like, more and more people are starting to awake. The more and more new GMO food are appearing in our supermarkets. So
yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, the corn you get today is mucus forming and literally poisonous. But the corn, the ancient blue corn of the Hopi, would only germinate if you sang the right song. It was like a family pet. And I've seen personally that cornmeal used to call the wind, and I know the physics. So that was happy DNA.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. When will we sing to our vegetables again?
The Hopis know.
I hope they do. The apple form in itself is interesting. Of course, we got the core, and we got the it almost looks like the magnetic field, if you want. There's some specific geometry to this fruit, and of course you can't copy it. You know, there's we have the saying, you know, an apple a day keeps the doctor away for a reason, and so many. Not only, I mean, you know, if you look from scientific, how we, you know, school scientific that we get presented, it's, they don't even know what kind of other forces and even stuffs are in there that help. You know, if you or to take one of the, just take like vitamin C, you take that out, you know, and you just give vitamin C in a pill. That's not like eating an apple. There's so many other things to it. So what's the specific
Well, if you bite into a whole apple, you'll feel a tingle in your cheek. But if you bite into applesauce, you don't feel a tingle. Well, the new information is that charge is the food. If you cut an apple on the X plane, you see a pentagram. And when I originally animated the 3D fractal called the Holy Grail, I called it Adam's apple, because you see the side view. It's toroidal.
Yeah. It also brings now to mythology again. It's always fascinating when we are remembering the Buddha story and how he reached enlightenment under the tree. So again, he reached that enlightenment. He saw before that the visions of not very, nice things, and he had to, withstand that. And also he saw the snake, that DNA spiral. And again, he himself became that apple tree, and that apple fruit, which he, experience himself. So, and after that he woke up and realized everything. So again, very nicely correlating.
And the Bodhi tree had a lot of charge. It's true. I think the ponytail geometry of his hair, and he ate the milk that had been through the goat twice, I think. And he said, eliminate desire. Whereas Gurdjieff said, charge the battery of yearning. Who was right?
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I also wanted to ask you is about wheat. We have wheat in everything. We go now everywhere we travel. We always have the products which contain wheat. And what can you hear here in energy and how that also relates to our bodies? Because some investigations just are showing us that it's not very beneficial.
Well, it isn't that the wheat DNA was evil. It was a very happy thing, but unfortunately, generations of monoculture make the wheat DNA angry, specifically in the sense that the DNA itself has been deprived of diversity and fractality, which is the physics of why when you put wheat on your tongue, it generates mucus, because your immune system is saying, not self, which it means it's saying there is pain in that DNA memory. And so the fact that the wheat DNA is mucus producing is indicative of the monoculture and the DNA that's been subjected to charge isolation, failure to embed, loss of genetic diversity. So from that point of view, most wheat products are poisonous to most people today.
Yeah, another thing as well, which is also very interesting, we have crop circles in UK, and also they are appearing usually in the fields of wheat or other crops. So again, those shapes correlating with the energy.
Oh, that's another story there. The residual microwave in the crop circles is actually antithetic to life.
Maybe you had ever a chance to investigate them yourself and just feel the energy?
Bit of a Kundalini trigger, but so is a microwave oven. No, the MIT group that tried to emulate crop circles had to emulate the microwave signature. And it's true, the diameter of the wheat stem that bends is the wavelength of the bending microwave, and we know why. Most of the crop circles are over military bases that have microwave antennas for starters. Some is not so good.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe you also have some insights of telling people how to maybe do some body grounding and how to do that properly to just reach all the benefits of uniting all those fractals inside.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Thank you, dear. No, the book is called Earthing, and it just simply means that the phase lock to ground, access to ground, is access to fractality, called perfect charge distribution. And that's as true for electricians as it is true for psychologists, to be grounded. And so, people who have high rubber shoes and they walk on concrete with metal in it their whole lives and never get grounded, they have infinitely more disease. People who learn how to ground properly, they get healthy, because it's phase relationship to ground, which is fractality, which achieves charge distribution embedding, sometimes called the divine.
Anything you would like to add, Dan?
Well, I just would encourage people to read the literature about fractal science, fractalfield.com, and feel free to communicate and stay in touch with questions. And we really do know how to now build a bliss temple and rejuvenation field. And even in the therify.net, when you have these bliss experiences with plasma fusion, the fact is we can use the technology to light this tornado. The ancient Sumerians called it Dirana or Stargate. But the fact is, even in that intense healing field, unless you go within and learn to steer that tornado from within, ultimately you don't actually make use of the field. So go within.
Right. Yeah.
But really a pleasure meeting you. And if people are interested in the science, I would invite them to fractalu.com and we're happy to share and happy to come back again. It's just that it's so late at night here, I think we're going to crash.
Oh, that's wonderful. Dan, we thank you so much. Yeah, that felt good. Little late for you. Sorry about that.
Well, thanks. Nice meeting you. I'd be pleased to chat again.
Wow. It's been great. I had fun. Have a good night.
Good night. Take care. Bye-bye.
We all want to see, we all want to be real, and we're searching when we're finding. We all want to feel the taste of belief, and we search for directions where we meet with our fears. We all want to steer, we want to appear, even in the highest battle, face the enemy. Do you feel the grace of fear? There is no need to disappear. Just stay here and get clear.